Hello everyone and welcome to your webinar this morning on the steel making history at Hollis Croft. I am Natasha and I work for Wessex Archaeology. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator, and today I'm joined by Millie, who is one of our project managers, and she manages lots of the local Sheffield sites, including Sheffield Castle, Hollis Croft, and more recently Bailey Lane Steelworks. Lots of people said they watched the odd archaeological TV programme in the registration survey, so you may also recognise Millie from the Channel 4 programme, The Great British Dig History in Your Back Garden. Thank you for filling the survey in. It will help us in today's webinar. For those of you who are not familiar with Wessex Archaeology, we are a commercial archaeological unit and an educational charity. This means when developers want to disturb land, including the seafloor, they can contract us to undertake the legally required archaeological work on the site before they begin their construction works. So we do this by lots of different ways. We work in the ground, above ground, and at sea as well. We do desk-based assessments, trial trenching, and also mitigation work. We're an educational charity as well, and this means that what we find we aim to share with the local groups and the wider community. We do this in many ways, including lectures or more recently webinars like this one. Also, we work with family groups, with school groups. We look for volunteering opportunities for people. We work with the communities, and we also create lots of literature. We also have social media channels. So if you find this webinar interesting, you might want to go and find us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. And I will send some links out to our social media channels in an email after the webinar. You may be thinking that Wessex Archaeology doesn't sound like a local name, and you will be correct. We are a national company and our head office is based in Salisbury. But Sheffield is our second biggest office, and we run lots of local projects in Sheffield as well as the north of England. So I am going to try and hand you over to Elaine, and she is going to say a few words. I would like to say thank you to the U3A and to Elaine for having us here to deliver this webinar.
Hi, thank you very much, Natasha, and thank you for putting this talk together for today. Just a brief introduction from myself. I believe Hollis Croft tells the story of a city in miniature. It'll include the steelworks, the various toolmakers' premises, workers' houses and pubs. And we all sort of based in Sheffield. I mean, I've been here 40 years now, and the reason I came was to start working at the old British Steel. So we're all aware of the history of steelworks. I always thought of archaeology as something along the lines of, Roman remains and things like that. But this is a little bit more recent than what we usually do now. The Hollis Croft site used to be occupied by Footprint Tools, which some of you might remember for much of the 20th century. And it's now involved in a multi-million-pound mixed commercial and student housing development. Like to introduce Millie. As Natasha sort of says, we've got quite a sort of star here that's appeared on Channel 4's The Great British Dig. She's on YouTube, on Radio 4, Radio Sheffield, and she was the project manager for the dig. So I'll hand you over to Millie. Thank you very much.
Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Natasha, and thank you, Elaine, for the introduction. So thank you again, all for you who are joining us today. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Natasha. It turns out that I'm a celebrity. I wasn't aware of that, but if you say so, then don't worry about that too much. You can still call me Millie, and I've only been doing this because of the popular demand. You wanted all these talks, and I'm more than happy to tell you about the results of the archaeological evaluation and excavation at Holliscraft, which indeed is in Sheffield. So I just wanted one tiny clarification before we end this. Natasha said you can ask me anything. that is not completely true. Please do ask me anything about Holliscraft and archaeology. I'm not sure that I know anything more than that. But if we are ready, if you all have your teas and coffees with you, fasten your seat belts, and we're going to start. So we have excavated, as your screens say, at Holliscraft, and it is, as Elaine said, is going to be a Sheffield steel history in one site. I would like to say that in 2017, when that excavation and evaluation was going on, we have been supported by South Yorkshire Archaeological Services. The project at the beginning of it was managed by one of my colleagues, who is a senior manager at Wessex Archaeology, Richard O'Neill. The project we were commissioned by Johnson Associates for Watkin Jones Group, who have now, as Elaine already said, built a mixed development, which is student accommodation and a few other commercial units at the site. I also would like to say thank you to my team, who was on site excavating for 3 months in 2017, but also to those who were involved in post-excavation and reporting. Wessex Archaeology is a large company, and we drew in our colleagues in-house, colleagues from various different offices. My big thank you goes to Jewett family, to Chris, Penny, Richard and Tim of Footprint Tools Limited, and they're friends now. And when we met, they were exceptionally kind and polite and lovely and helpful to me, and made available their amazing and extensive archive on not only Footprint Limited tools, but also on Holliscraft. And I'm very grateful for that. And I'm fortunate to be able to show you some of the photos, some of the slides, some of the parts of their archive. Hunter Archaeological Society also played a great role in excavation and the records, the research, maps and background research for the site. And these are just a handful of the specialists who delivered their reports for our final document that we have then sent to our client. Just to mention a few, it's Chris Cumberpatch, who analysed pottery, Susie White, Rod McKenzie, Paul Quinn, Lorraine Higby and Lorraine Mevam, and Ines Lopez de Riga, who has analysed the environmental samples. So for those of you who don't know where Sheffield is, well, you're in trouble. But it's here. It's in a middle of the island, of the country, and from the bird view, Sheffield Google Maps looks like this big blue line. I'm going to use my mouse cursor to show you things on slides today. That's done. Holliscraft is here, so it's on the western edge of Sheffield. When we have excavated the site, we haven't excavated the entire Holliscraft Street or indeed Garden Street or Whitecroft. The red line, which is a cross shape, shows you what is it that we have excavated. And that is roughly 0.7 hectares of land, which is located, it was in medieval times agricultural land to the west of the medieval town, and it was in an open field known as Townfield, which had been enclosed into smaller parts and crofts by 1637. We have done some poll research before we started this webinar, and I know that there are a few geologists among you there, and then you probably all know that the underlying geology there is penine lower coal measures, which is mudstone, siltstone, and superficial geology is gravel, silt, sand, and alluvium. All that information is available on British Geological Survey if you want to look online to see what's going on in that part of Sheffield. So in medieval times, it was agricultural land, and the shape, the way the streets are laid later, follow the shape of the fields that were enclosing. In the 18th century is in a way when our story begins, because we don't have much information from what was going on between the medieval times and 1637 or even later, 100 years later. But in the 18th century, the site in a way begins its life when the trustees of Hollis Hospital leased the land to a Jonathan Moore, who wanted to develop the land with roads and buildings. And an early deed that tells us all this is held by Footprint Tools, by Jewett family. And that deed is a beautiful, impressive, large sheet written in a amazing handwriting. And it was also appended with 14 wax seals. I'm showing you only 4 here, but these are of Thomas Hollis Sr. on the left-hand side, also Daniel Bridges, John Cook, and John Hollis Jr. These are the important people, important men who were well known at the time in Sheffield, and under Hollis surname, there was a hospital in town and a few other very important buildings. The size of the plot that they have leased or agreed to lease to Jonathan Moore was 96 yards by 29 yards, which I believe is something like 87 by 26 meters. And the date on the deed is 26th of December 1726. So it's a very early document showing what was going on at Holliscraft at the time. This is now Gosling map of 1736, which shows 3 long blocks, developed blocks. So there is, I don't know if you can see my mouse here. So there is one block here, another above, and the third above them. And those blocks are divided by streets known as Hollis Charity Street, which became Holliscraft, Whitefield, which is now Whitecroft. But what you can't see there is Garden Street, simply because it had not been laid out at this time. Between this map, between 1736 and 1787, the Footprint Archive tells us that Holliscraft plot or plots were leased to numerous different people. For example, to Stephen Green, John Shatley, which is, there were cutlers. Their tenement included barns, smithies, workshops, buildings, orchards, and gardens. And this is demonstrates in a minuscule, because this was just one of the plots at Holliscraft, how, if you want, the entire area, the Holliscraft was developed. Cutlery production was recorded in 1774. That is not the earliest record, but it's most certainly the record, the secured record for Holliscraft. So we know that that was table knives, for example, were made there. There was a table knife cutler there, scissor maker, and pen knife manufacturers were there at Holliscraft. In the late 18th century, Fairbank undertook mapping of the area. This is a plan, or if you want, a joint 2 plans were produced between 1787 and 1789, and we have plotted another plan of Garden Street, which was completed earlier in 1787. And what you can see here are a series of courts. So these dark things are a series of houses and courts which incorporate probably small-scale industrial and or commercial enterprises, especially at the northern frontage of Holliscraft. And you can see the similar pattern here on the south side of Holliscraft. But here in the south, there are some industrial bits that appear to be on a larger scale, with a large plot consisting of these buildings here around the courtyard, which is labeled John Kenyon. And this is just one of the names that I'm sure most, if not all of you, are familiar with. It's a well-known name and surname in cutlery making, steel production, and iron conversion in Sheffield. John Kenyon was a manufacturer, but primarily he was a very, very skillful merchant. He traded with Russia, Germany, Scandinavia, Spain, Italy, but also with North America. He traded in tools and steel, but in other various types of goods. He imported steel from Sweden and then later Germany, and he also imported wheat from Russia, for example. Iron buttons, shears, scissors, they were exported by John Kenyon and Company, alongside goods such as stockings and silk, for example. If you look closely, this map also includes other Sheffield known names and surnames such as Samuel Marple, John Wilde, Skelton family, Thomas Wilde, John Harrison, for example, a son, which is a second steel work adjacent to John Kenyon's. John Harrison not only had the steel works, he was also he appears to have held the Orange Branch public house, or at least an earlier building on the same plot, which was roughly here. There is also, this time, there is documentary evidence for both cementation and crucible furnaces on site, and I will explain later what both of those processes do. This map shows the development, the growth of Holliscraft as we know it. It is all cutlery, steel, iron production, but it's also all the other businesses that go together with that. The typical working class house in this part of Sheffield at this time had a single room. So these buildings on the north side, which are a bit smaller than, for example, this big complex here in the middle, they had a single room on each of 3 floors, and this is the same scenario that you can see throughout Holliscraft, but also other parts of Sheffield, this part of Sheffield, and this is what is depicted on this map. The center of household activity was the ground floor, and that was a living room which had the largest fireplace, and it was used as kitchen, dining room, living room, washroom, bathroom, everything. The cellar below was used for storage, mostly for meat, if you had enough money to afford that, and coal. And the floors above provided sleeping. There were bedrooms. The enclosed courtyards were semi-private spaces and were used for where laundry was undertaken, but there were also courtyards that had additional buildings, small buildings, where small manufacturing was going on. Industrial activities at this time is anything from single journeyman to relatively large steelworks and tool making companies and firms such as those owned by John Kenyon. The best known trade in Sheffield was the cutlery industry. And as I said, this was a collection of crafts. So it was not only converting iron into steel and then making it to cutlery, it was also forging, grinding, finishing, buffing, and other industries that came together with that. The basic layout of these larger industrial parts was very similar. The buildings, as you can see here, for example, in John Kenyon, the buildings, they're grouped around the yard, and there was an entrance here, for example, which is archway, which was wide enough to accommodate wheel traffic. And this is where the things were obviously coming in and going out. We are now moving to the mid-19th century Holliscraft. You can, on this map, see that the site is characterized by courts associated again with domestic and industrial activity. And in the former John Kenyon site, we now have Holliscraft Steel Works. And when we have tried to find out who was the owner of Holliscraft Steel Works and what was going on site, we basically had to go for one thing that it was known, which was the number, street number for Orange Branch Pub, and then basically to count from there up on the right hand side and then down again. And it turns out that Bergin, Virgin and Wells appear to have been set up as self-contained steelworks in this part of the site, taking in raw iron and sending it out as finished articles. White's 1856 directory lists them as steel converters, refiners and rollers, and file and spring manufacturers, and there were also fender manufacturers. Later in 1862, there is a similar description, which is exactly file and spring manufacturers, steel converters and rollers. For people who are into steel industry or who have been somehow involved in one or another way into steel industry, all these things, so refiners, converters, rollers, means that they were able to take in raw iron and then produced send out the final product. So all the stages, making iron into blister steel, and then blister steel into more refined steel, and then rolling it and making it into whatever they were to then sell, was going on site, which is a very important thing to remember, because I'm going to show you the remains of all these things, different parts of the factory that we came across when we excavated the site in 2017. It is also very important here to just look at those two circles and to try to remember them for later, because they are quite important. Who are the people? What are the other businesses that were here at the time? And we are looking at mid-19th century OS map that is on your screen right now. The smaller businesses, which are approximately 60, I think in a way hide the scale, the number of people who were there. And we know that around 680, 700 people were living at Holliscraft at the time. The majority of those Holliscrafts were families, which were father, mother, and children, but we also have records of single parent families, extended family members such as nieces, nephews, grandparents, grandchildren were sometimes living as part of a family unit. We also have examples of families with the same surname living next door to each other, being, for example, brothers, and who run a cutlery business together. For the group of those 700 people as a whole, most were English, primarily from Sheffield, but also from locations elsewhere in Yorkshire, Lancashire, and Midlands. A very few were from further afield in England. We have people from Kent, Middlesex, Newcastle, and Cumberland. And we also have quite a significant number of people who are of Irish origin, which is very important to remember for Holliscraft, because it is at the time of the famine in Ireland, but it's also very important to know how Holliscraft looks today, who are the people who are coming to Holliscraft today, or how indeed it looked later in the 19th century when the church was built, the Catholic church, up on the top north west part of Holliscraft. These people who live there are lodgers. They had lodgers and apprentices who were unrelated to the host families. The apprentices comprised by boys, mainly between 14 and 20 years of age. They were cabinet makers and various types of cutlery and tool manufacturers. They were all English. There was one boy from Kent and another boy from Middlesex. The rest of them are from Sheffield and or from South Yorkshire. There were 39 lodgers, quite a few female lodgers. They sometimes formed small family groups of 2 or 3 persons renting a property. We know that 6 lodgers were born in Ireland. The rest of them were English, and they were primarily from Sheffield. We know that the youngest married person was 18 years old, and that we know that around 280 people were listed as married. The youngest widow was 22 years old, and we know that population who were married or who had been married form a big majority of the adult population on the site. We also can see from the records that the rate of unmarried people appeared to decline rapidly with age, but the age at the time was a bit different than it is now. So at 23, you were considered to be a bit too old to marry. So the unmarried people declined rapidly after age of 23. Women were employed in manufacturing and related trades, such as blade polisher, bone button maker. We have file dresser, fork burnisher, and so on and so forth. But we also have women in more so-called general job descriptions, which are called assistants and warehouse works. We have one lady who was Silver Plattle's wife, and she also might have been involved in industry. The second most common category of employment for women was at clothes makers. Just like female employment, male occupation were dominant by industrial activities, and they relate to cutlery, tool manufacturers, and related trades, which is blade grinder, again, bone button maker, brass turner, comb makers, cutler blade makers, pen and pocket knife trades, razor trades, and so on and so forth. When it comes to the furnaces that I already mentioned, so Crucible and Cementation Furnaces, that was men only job, and we have 15 people who lived at Holliscraft, who worked at Holliscraft. So it was a big industry. So they solely worked in furnaces. We also have other industries which are important for the steel industry and maintenance of these furnaces. We have brick makers, bricklayers, joiners, and so on and so forth. So it is absolutely everything that you can imagine. It's a microcosm of the entire Sheffield here in Holliscraft. You are now looking at the late 19th century map, which shows that what it was, John Kenyon's work is now, and then Holliscraft is now Globe Forge and rolling mills. That plot, we know again from the written record, was sold in 1899 to this Globe Forge and rolling mill company. we don't know who the actual owners. I don't know who the actual owners of that particular company is. I would have thought that it's a conglomerate. There are a few people involved in ownership of that place, but surrounding area appears to have changed very little between 1850s and 1890s, and that stays like this until 1905, when we have next Ordnance Survey map, except that now Globe Forge and rolling mills belong to Footprint Tools. By 1935, the Footprint tools were part of it. The northern part is demolished, refurbished by 1954. We now have expansion of Footprint tools, and it had been built by the time of 1964 as it is, and it's merged then together with other companies owned by Jewett family under the trading name of Footprint Tools Limited, which in 2009 relocated to Admiral Works in Overton, where it still operates. I'm proud to say that only a couple of days ago I spoke to Chris, and they're still working, happily operating there. So that is a brief history of, very brief history of Holliscraft. If you want to research more about the names and about the industrialists of the site and of the time, please do. I'm also quite happy to answer as many emails as you can send, and whatever, as much as I know about the site. Just one maybe sentence of warning is, be careful when going down that different names in the 19th century register hall, because a lot of people are of the same name and same surname. Rarely you get a distinction between senior and junior, so good luck with that. And I love to hear from you. What are your findings of these prominent names Holliscraft are? So when we started on site, the Footprint Tools building was demolished and the site looked like this. Now, this is it's a great photo because it shows you the church that was built in mid 19th century at the top of the hill, and it also shows you how actually steep Holliscraft is. At the top of the site, we have measured 85 meters above the sea level, and then at the bottom of the site is 65. So it's almost 20 meters difference between the level at the top and at the bottom of the site, and that played a huge role in particularly finds that we have retrieved, because the site had to be leveled and backfilled numerous times during its history. But nevertheless, this is where we have started. And what we have done, whoops, sorry for that, we have positioned various different trenches, which are colored in blue here, and different green, salmon, or if you want pink and yellow, are just the three different phases and three different parts that we had to excavate in a different way. So with these trenches, we wanted to, as always, we targeted. It was an educated guess based on the information we could get from the previous excavations and the history of the site, and we tried to see what was still there. What are there any remains of any of these things that we have seen, that I've shown you on the 18th and 19th century maps, and to try to gather as much information, as much finds, to put these the story of the lives of the people who lived and worked on the site together. So with these trenches, we try to see the different layouts of the buildings as shown on the 18th century maps and 19th century maps. What you're looking at, this background map, is one of the 19th century OS maps. So you can see that, for example, with trench B, we have tried to see, are these dark lines which represent the partitions within a house or a small factory still exist, and so on and so forth. So every single trench is there for a reason, and every single trench was answered several different questions, but as the nature of the archaeological world is, probably asked us more questions that we were able to answer. Nevertheless, we have found what we were looking for, and these are the walls. This is the 18th century wall of one of the dwellings of at Holliscraft. Here you can see the same building with the cobbled floor, and these are all cut into the virgin ground, the natural ground. So these are the earliest remains the buildings that we have on site. Some of them we could link to the buildings that we have seen on the 18th century map. And this one, for example, is of one of the two pubs that our excavation and evaluation area covered. I have already mentioned the Orange Branch. This pub was called the Cock. And there is no surprise that there were loads of different pubs on this street. It is not only because it was just as it is now, or is as it will be again from tomorrow, a popular pastime, drinking in pubs. It was also the beer at the time seems to be watered down, or if you want, not as strong as the beer is today, and it worked as helping people who were working in extremely hot furnaces to hydrate. So it was not only there to socialize, to talk to your mates, to see your mates, and to hear what is the latest gossip in Sheffield. It is there to help you survive the enormous heat that you were exposed to during the day. There are numerous paintings and information about how polluted and how hot Sheffield was at a time when chimneys were blasting and the furnaces were working 24/7, almost all year round. But there is a particularly lovely walk that David Blunkett has done, and he remembers from his childhood that there were fig trees and lemon and orange trees growing in Sheffield, and there is a historical record that the temperature was much higher. So it is that the pollution and heat that was changing the microcosm again, or if you will, microclimate here. So the pubs were very important. There remains of the houses which were opposite the pub. You can see here cobbled surface, which is outside the yard, then cobbled surface inside the house, and various different rooms divided by these brick walls, which are of the 19th century, late 19th century, but you can see that they're sitting on the earlier stone walls. Some of them are plot divisions, and some of them are there for bases of a larger buildings. Nevertheless, they are earlier than their 18th century. We also have evidences of these cutlery working flues. You can see two of them in one area of the site. This was all full of charcoal and smoked and smoke affected bricks. We also then have a small work building here, and this one was particularly lovely not only because it had two clear divisions between two work areas with some metal bars and wooden beams in situ, but also when we have peeled off that top part, we have came across another layer, if you want, of archaeology, which by default, isn't it, lower down, it is earlier, it should be, and this one is in particular earlier, and this is 18th century with these bricks which are slightly later. But this floor here, these stone surfaces here, and in this room, this is all 18th century. And that relates to the works that I was telling you earlier that you could see on the Fairbanks plan from the 18th century. Again, more divisions, more bricks, more brick walls. They might look the same to a lot of people, but I have learned through researching and speaking to different people about the industrial archaeology that apparently no two cementation or crucible furnaces are the same. So they might look the same, they're all very different. What you can see here are, again, brick earlier and later divisions, but also very early, and by that I mean probably late 17th, early 18th century stone wall, which worked as a boundary division at the time. We have came across deep cellars and deep cuts. Again, no surprise. They are cut into natural. The base was stone. These are 18th century. And then later, you can see the same base, same stones used to basically build upon the 19th century buildings. So even if you just look into one trench or one area, you can see life of the site, the entire life from the late 17th, early 18th century, all the way to the this concrete here is something that Footprint Tools had put in when they were improving their works at Footprint Tools. So all the way to the 20th century, which I think it's a brilliant thing to see. Again, the same example. So natural ground, geological, starts with robust stone walls and supports, and then it goes to the 19th and 20th century bricks and 20th century concrete slab. Now, here it's very important to notice these bullnose bricks, and they are indicators of crucible furnace, which I will show you in a minute the remains of. We have found the Orange Branch pub, and that is where it was. It's this entire area. This is the yard, and it goes to the back. Oops. And it is these step stairs that lead down into the cellar. We could not excavate that deep simply because our health and safety regulations are not allowing us to do that. It's dangerous, but we have combined with this remains plus overlaying that over the 19th century maps are very confident that is the pub. The Orange Branch was there. It's probably one of the earliest. It's definitely the earliest pub at Holliscraft, but it's one of the earliest pubs in Sheffield too. And for those of you who are interested in arts, and I know there are a few of you there, not only in archaeology, although the two are closely linked, I would like you to, for a second, imagine a 19th century pub in which workers, men and women, go to drink pints, to socialize and play games, but also to look, to know and find out what is going on in Sheffield at the time, not only the latest gossips, but what is happening in theatres and what is happening around the theatres. And in the 1850s, just adjacent to the site of Sheffield Castle, there was a theatre building which housed the circus. And one of the main circus performers and one of the main circuses at the time belonged to a guy called Pablo Fanke, who was the first black circus owner in the country at the time. And it was exceptionally skillful and very good horseman, and his shows were sold out. That's the same Pablo Fanke who was immortalized in the Beatles songs For the Benefit of Mr. Kite. There will be a show tonight on Trampoline. The Hendersons will all be there late of Pablo Fanque's fair. So that's the guy who was there. So if you were for a minute or two imagining that this was all only slums and poor people, poor land, I just would like you to rethink your image of Sheffield and Holliscraft in the mid-19th century. Yes, it was. It wasn't easy. It was very difficult. It was very hard. It wasn't easy to live. It wasn't easy to earn for the living. It most certainly was not pleasant to live adjacent to a massive forge, noisy and hot, but it wasn't. There were some silver linings there as well. There were some cool things happening in Sheffield at the time as well. So those people who went to theaters and circuses and who worked wore shoes like this. And this doesn't look particularly nice because there are remains of various leather shoes that people were wearing at the time, which we are able to reconstruct and see. You can see this one here, for example, almost complete. The rest of them are parts of soles and heels. People at the time smoked pipes like this. These are locally manufactured. Some of them are just stems that we have found. Some of them are also bowls. Some of them bear marks, maker's marks. Some of them are beautifully decorated. These on the right-hand side are remains of fragments of various different plates that were found on site. And also this little thing here is a fragment of a bone handle. As I said earlier, this was and a big production, big manufacturing sites, not only metal, but also everything else that contributed to the final product. We have also found various different types of brick. This is relatively modern. This is a 20th century brick that was made in Sheffield, if there was any doubt. It's archaeologists love things that actually say what they are, when are they made, and who made them. And sometimes we are lucky, like with this brick. There is a sharpening stone. We have found loads of different size stones for grinding, sharpening, and things like that. So what I'm showing you is just a handful of the finds, just for an illustration. We have found hundreds and hundreds of these. But as it is, we have also came across this, and this is a medieval coin. And this was a interesting find from loads of different points of view. First of all, we haven't found anything else medieval on site. We know that at medieval times, Holliscraft was an agricultural field. There were no dwellings, there were no developments, nothing of that kind that we know of was going on. We also don't have a single other medieval secured feature. So what is this medieval coin doing at Holliscraft? And also, what is this medieval coin doing within one of the pubs? This was found inside what it used to be the Cock Pub. And I have to confess here in front of 156 of you that I said, oh, that's fake. And colleagues who know better said, no, this is a long cross penny, this is medieval. And I said, no, this is definitely fake. I mean, what is medieval coin doing on this side? There was nothing medieval, and there were an awful lot of fake coins in the 19th century. And I bet that this is just one of the things that was kept in a pub as they would. So they said, right, okay, let's bet. So I've put £5 on this not medieval coin, only to lose those £5 because the coin was, we didn't want to damage it. We didn't want to do any intrusive chemical or metallurgical analysis because the coin had yet to be preserved, described. So we have taken it to a local jeweler who scanned this and said, oh, no, this is real. There is silver and gold in it. So I do know what I talk about, but not all the time. And I definitely didn't know what I was talking about when I was looking at that medieval coin. Nevertheless, it's one of the interesting finds, one of those things that kind of throw you back and you go, what is this doing here? I still don't know what that was doing here. It's probably that fell out from, I don't know, somebody's pocket in medieval times, or someone in the 19th century, 18th, 19th century has found this medieval coin and kept it in a pub, or it was introduced from somewhere else when the site was leveled. As I said, there's a huge difference between the top and the bottom of the site, almost 20 meters. So, but it's a interesting fine medieval coin from Holliscraft. More usual or things that we expected to find are these things. These are fragments of crucibles, and they are used several times. They are heavily encrusted, corroded, and broken. Crucibles were originally made clay and then laid and filled with chopped blister steel and few other ingredients, and then exposed to a very high temperature to be melted into and purified into a better steel that was used for more precise works. This is, as you can see there, it's all brown, so that's ferrous, that's iron. But we also have found one crucible which was green at the bottom, and that is copper. Copper alloy gives that green color, which is another brilliant thing about Holliscraft. So now we know that not only the ferrous, that iron was converted into steel, we know that the other metals were also used to be purified, to be better, and then made into, for example, parts of various different clocks or any other finer products. And these are the two crucible furnace holes that we have found on site. There are records that there was a crucible furnace with 9 and 11 holes. We couldn't go and investigate on either side of those just because of our site area restrictions and health and safety, but nevertheless we have demonstrated that at least one crucible furnace was there. And this is how crucible furnaces look. This is a cross section. So this thing here, the remains of, I've showed you those encrusted crucibles, they look like this. They were positioned and then the heat, they were exposed to heat, covered, the hole was covered with metal lids, and then there were big chimneys taking the air out, and that was controlled. So the air, so if you're on the temperature, the strength of the temperature center fire was controlled by controlling air. This is how one of the crucible furnaces look in a cross section. This is a stack of crucibles that were drying. They're made ready to be used. There are two which are cooking, if you want. They have iron and other things in melting, and then these are large chimneys that are taking the hot air out. The best example, and probably one of my favorite things in Sheffield, is Abbeydale Industrial Estate, and I highly recommend, as soon as now, these days, these strange times that we live in, you can go, please do go and visit the site if you haven't. You can see a stack of crucibles here, and this is a crucible building with a furnace and massive chimneys. So this is a typical, when you see a chimney like that anywhere in the country, especially in Sheffield, if there are any left, either underground or above ground, they indicate crucible furnaces. This is just, I'm not saying that the Holliscraft look exactly like this, because this is a countryside, this is a large building, but it looks something like this. It most certainly was at least one large building, which was probably made of brick there. This is stone, this is stone roof, slate. Sheffield City crucible furnaces were probably not made of stone and slate. There was no need for that, but brick was probably used. However, everything else in the crucible furnace is exactly the same. So this is the cross section of that crucible furnace in Abbeydale, and that is how Holliscraft operated as well. You can see different holes, and these are two of them we have found. These are the metal lids. This is the pot making underground, and this thing here is controlling air in and out. These are the two guys. We know that it's men who were employed that are now tipping melted liquid steel into one of the molds, and then here people delivering and collecting goods. This is how that looked, and this is recreated in the actual furnace. These are the pits, the holes with lids. That's a crucible that has been, now there is nothing pouring out, but there will be hot steel coming out into the mold. And here is an illustration exactly what is going on, just on a smaller scale. But most of the time, these places would also had going further on what happens with the products from these molds. So in this case, these are files and probably sews and so on and so forth. In the middle of the site, where those little two circles, dashed circles were, we have found exactly what those two circles depict, and these are cementation furnaces, and they are probably the best preserved, they were best preserved cementation furnaces in Sheffield, not the only ones excavated. Wessex Archaeology and Arcus excavated several others in Sheffield, but these were beautifully preserved. Now, what you can see here is, you're probably looking, saying, what is this? This is a mess. There's an awful lot of bricks and stone, and you're absolutely right. But if you zoom your eye, if you zoom on this part here, this is a chest, one of the chests, one of the cementation furnaces, and here is just a cross section of another one. Everything else, this, for example, here is an access tunnel. This is the building that it was surrounding, and I'll show you in a minute how that looks. Brickwork around. These are the stone bases, here arches. And on the left-hand side, these are later additional things that are related indeed to converters, but are later than this feature here and this feature here. Okay, so this is how the site looks from the Holliscraft street. This Holliscraft is here. We are now looking south. These are the later access points, flues, chimneys, floors, etc. Here is one chest for the cementation furnace, and here is another one. And I'm deliberately doing circles, so there is one circle around here, one circle around there, and these are the two circles that you've seen on the 1850s OS map. This is how the cementation furnace looked. So what these things here are these. So they're stone chests. The access points, you can see that's this here with stoke holes, which I'm going to show you in a minute. And what we haven't found are the brick constructions above the ground. They are not there at the time, to no surprise, because they have been demolished by the later developments. But nevertheless, all this have survived, all the changes and all the 20th century works, demolishing and improvements, refurbishing, and we're still there when we excavated the site in 2017. This is how the cementation furnaces look, and what they do, they convert iron into blister steel. You put iron bars into chests, you pack them tightly, make sure that there is no air. Those iron bars, as we know now from the background research, come from Sweden and Germany, mostly from Sweden. They are then sealed, and they're exposed to a high temperature for 5 to 7 days. And what you get is the called blister steel, and it's called blister steel because when you take out those bars, they have bubbles. They have the surface. Their surface look like blisters, and hence the name. This is the cross section. So what we have found on the site are remains of one chest and another chest, the surrounding buildings, and up to this level. Okay, we haven't found anything above that. We know that these cones upside down ice creams, if you want, were built on stone base, and then they were brick. This stone, which is a factory stone, locally sourced around Sheffield, was used to build chests, and it's the reason this particular stone was used because it expands and contracts when it's hot. It doesn't crack. One of the most important things that we have come across at Holliscraft, if you kind of want to just focus on specifics of the cementation furnace, are the prints of the bars that were laid in the chest. And this black material was a combination of grinding leftovers, but also charcoal and coal. And when burned and solid, it's called crucible, and it's a very Sheffield specific word and expression. You probably know that if you burn your bacon, you crucibled your bacon. You don't burn bacon in Sheffield. It's either crucibled or it's not. So that's that crucible. What we now know, up to the Holliscraft excavation, we know that the crucible was at the base of the chest. We now know that even the sides of those coffins, chest coffins, were laid, packed by as tight as possible, so there is no air. So now we know that it's not only floor, but the entire interior of the chest was tightly packed. I have mentioned a couple of checking points, access points, if you want. This is one of the clearing stoke holes, and then there is another. There's a small tunnel which was going underground under the entire construction of the cementation furnace. We have also came across some large tunnels, deep, long, almost 4 meters underground. We haven't excavated them because that was, again, too dangerous and there was no need. We have proven that they are there. And as I said, in addition, we have a later development here. This is, I think, we don't have direct evidence for that, but there is everything to suggest too that that is probably now of a late 19th, early 20th century gas, probably Bessemer process, which follows cementation crucible furnaces, just an improvement of speed, the quality and the technology of the iron being converted into steel. And how do I know that that is that at Holliscraft? Well, there is a photo of it beside the 19th century map, the physical evidences of the of archaeological evidences on site. Chris Chewit said, look, Millie, there is a photo from the early 20th century. And these are the two chimneys and big cementation furnaces that we have found. This is how Holliscraft looked at the early 20th century. Here is the cementation furnace. That's that arched entrance that I mentioned on the 19th century, and the building surrounding the yard that was in middle. This is now Holliscraft, and the same buildings looking a bit later. This is 1950s, 1960s, when the buildings belong, when the area belongs entirely to footprint tools. And this is how the building looked before it went down and before the excavation started. So this is a story, a circle. We're back to the beginning of the history of Holliscraft. Now, if you would like to read more about this, because I have only literally and metaphorically speaking scratched the surface with this, you can go to our website. You can also specifically go to Holliscraft, but please feel free to browse and to see other things that we have done in Sheffield and indeed across the country. If you want to see how these cementation furnaces looked in 3D, you go to sketchfab.com and then search Holliscraft. And my colleagues, wizards, Bree and Ian, had put this 3D model there for you. Also, you can search all the archive from the excavation going to ADS. This is what we have done so far. I believe there is a final report available there if you want to go into more detail on this. I am still to produce, we are still to issue an academic article. And in addition to that, we are doing a comic book, which will put together all this information for for people who prefer to read that information in a comic book. It's just something different that we are doing. So this was the story of Hollis Croft, but it was in real life the story of Sheffield and Sheffield history of steel making industry. Thank you very much. I'm going to go back to Natasha and to see if there are any questions from you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Millie. It's a lovely presentation. Got the first question. Someone has asked what is happening at the site at the moment. Do you know?
Yes, I do. The site has been developed, and if you go to Holliscraft, you will see above ground buildings which are to do with student accommodation and other things in those. You can rent a unit there, but it's mostly student accommodation. It has been built above ground.
So another person has asked what will happen with the objects that you found on the site?
All our archive, paper and objects, has been deposited with the Sheffield museums. It is with them and it is going to be up to them or someone else if they become part of the wider exhibition on Sheffield industrial history and archaeology, but they are all deposited with the museum.
Brilliant.
Now, if you want to read a bit more about these finds, what they are, how important they are, how widely known, distributed they are, our final report contains the specialists' reports on the finds. So we have a specialist who reported on leather shoes, who reported on pottery and clay pipes. So if you would like to know more about those specific, about the finds specific to Holliscraft, please do read our final report.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Another question, will we be doing any more archaeology at Holliscraft or the local area around Holliscraft?
Not in this century, I would not think. So the Holliscraft where we have excavated is now going to be used by people who are going to live there. So it's another story, but it's for archaeologists of the future. Surrounding area, there were a couple of sites which were done by I think two other different archaeological companies. I'm not sure what is going to happen with the south and south east part of the site. There might be future development, but I don't know when.
Okay, so that's one to watch and keep an eye on.
Yes.
And everyone do follow our Twitter account. We have a Sheffield Twitter account, and you'll be able to find out what Wessex Archaeology is up to. So what happened to the below ground brickworks? Were they preserved, Millie?
They were not preserved in situ, but what we have done, we have preserved them by record, which means that we have meticulously recorded every single brick, every single stone. We have, if you go to one of those sites that I have mentioned earlier, let me just see if you can still see so if you go to this one, Sketchfab, you will see the 3D model, which was absolutely based on the remains that were found there. So we have recorded all that in paper, described, we have taken photos, we have flown a drone, we have done 3D, and then the development went on top of them. They're not preserved in situ, but they're preserved by record.
Brilliant. I will send everyone an email after the webinar with the links that Millie's provided for further information. So a slightly different question this time. How dangerous was it for people to live so close to these furnaces?
Very, I would have thought. There are no, but saying that there were no records of any large fires there. So I would have thought that, although I'm pretty sure that they didn't have health and safety at the level we have today, they did have health and safety regulations. I would have thought that people were naturally, as always, very careful. But I also know that it was very dangerous. It was particularly dangerous if you were working in the furnaces, but also if you were around. If Again, I highly recommend going to Abbeydale Industrial Estate. You will see how the building was tied together with the metal bars. So when the entire building of a furnace expands because of the heat, those metal bars are keeping it together. You can also see what is the protection that people who were working were wearing, but you can also see how far apart and who was the nearest to the furnace and who was far away. It wasn't safe and easy, but it was remarkably, I suppose, they were aware, but also I would have thought lucky not to cause a massive damage to the area.
Okay. So, final few questions. Can you say something about the work you did before we went on site? So, did we know there was something there before we started excavating it? Was it a surprise? What was that process?
We did know. So the maps that I've showed you earlier, we were aware of them. We were also aware of there was a desk-based assessment, which was completed prior to the commencement of the archaeological work. We also have done extensive research in Sheffield Archives, Sheffield Local Studies Library, online, which greatly supplemented the information. We have also then went to afterward to Footprint Sheffield Limited. But before we went, we have done comprehensive paperwork, maps, research, but also we have looked at the excavations that were carried out around the area and also the excavations that were carried out on a similar sites in Sheffield to be able to kind of guesstimate or predict what is it that we might find. So what we knew what was there. What we didn't know was what was the level of the preservation. So that came back as a surprise. So the fact that there were things there didn't, but the fact that they were in a very, very, very good state, that was a surprise, because I have personally thought that the later development, even things in the 19th century that would have damaged things from the 18th century, and then the later 20th century development would do more damage, but that was not the case. So that was a surprise.
Okay. And following on from that, Millie, what was your favourite moment while you were working on this site?
Losing £5 over that medieval coin. Yeah, I am a fair player. I like that, but I loved. It's very hard to pinpoint one. I was amazed by the amount of the archaeological features and their exceptional preservation, but I was also very, very much touched by people who came to visit the site. We have run a couple of open days for local Sheffielders and their guests to come and see the site, and for the local historical and archaeological societies. And as you can hear, I'm not from Sheffield, but I was welcomed, and I was the stories that those people have told me about their background and about their involvement in Sheffield's industrial history was absolutely amazing. And then probably icing on a cake was meeting Jewett family, who are part of Sheffield's steel industry, and then looking at their archive. It was just like, I don't know how to explain, birthday wish or Christmas, but just continued for like 3 weeks. I was just opening presents every day. So yeah, it's people. It's people of the 21st century, people of the 20th century, and then these lives that I'm still trying to understand and reconstruct from the 19th century. That is my favorite part.
Oh, wonderful. That's a great answer. Final question I will put to you, and it's quite a big question. Why did cutlery making in particular take place in Sheffield?
Because Sheffield had a perfect combination. If we're talking of about the 19th century and 18th century Sheffield had a perfect combination of water supply, local stone supply for the making of the furnaces. It had knowledge. It had waterways. So it's a just a very, very good combination of things that were needed for the industry, and also the knowledge, craftsmanship, the endurance, and the will to continue that. I mean, I'm pretty sure that all of you know that at one Sheffield is a world known, and there is no household in this country where this country had its domains or anywhere in the world that does not have a single item that it says made in Sheffield, probably a knife or a fork or a spoon, but Sheffield is a world known, and it's a combination of natural, geological, but also combination of people's availabilities and skills.
Wonderful. So I think that's all the time we have for questions. I hope you have enjoyed the webinar. Do find us on social media, and until next time, goodbye.